Going to move on to this next topic. This will be perhaps the final. No, what? I may speak about Avatar. Avatar's re-releasing in theatres. They've gave us a trailer. I'm that underwhelmed. I didn't even watch the trailer. I seen Avatar, but 13 years ago. Do I want to go and see it again in the theatres? Well, I mean, we'll get into it. I'll speak about it briefly, I'm sure. James Bond, though, I'm pondering the question here. Does the next James Bond actor need to be much younger? Now, what is much younger? Daniel, I believe, was in his 40s when he was cast as James Bond 007. I don't know that for sure, but I think he was. He's knocking on 60 now. I want to say it was circa 16 years ago, the first Craig James Bond, Quantum of Solace, I think it was it? Casino Royale? I don't know. It was something like that anyway. It was 2006ish. So he was probably about 44, 43, which isn't far off the oldest cast James Bond actor, which I'll get into in a moment. So what is much younger than that? We're saying early 30s, mid 20s. That would certainly bring the likes of Tom Holland into play, who does want to play James Bond and has been pretty vocal in his desire to play James Bond. I'm going to furiously try and bring up the actors who are in line to play James Bond. I want to just look at their ages as I speak about this, very off the cuff. But as you can see here, it's Screen Rant covering it, speaking about the next James Bond. To date, 6 actors have played James Bond in the official movie franchise. It's an incredibly exclusive club. Yada yada yada. Speculations gain traction. They've begun their search for the 7th 007 and will have exacting standards when it comes to who will play the next Bond. And the actor's age is rumoured to be a key factor in any casting decision. This is just common sense, man. If you're going to cast someone to play James Bond, you want them to have that physicality, that youthful exuberance for as long as possible. You want them to have longevity over a decade. You don't want them to have 2 movies and then they're knocking on 55, 60. They're done in terms of acting. These high octane physical movies, you can't continue doing that into your 60s. It's not possible. It looks unrealistic. And even Tom Cruise, I mean, he's knocking on 60. He's just about getting away with it just now. There will be a point where Tom has to slow down as well and not do Mission Impossible movies for much longer. So I understand where they're getting at here. It should be important. Age should definitely be an important factor for a role like James Bond. Now, it goes 2 ways for me though, because James Bond does have a lived sort of persona. He's a guy who's experienced the world. He's weathered, he's been beaten and battered and shaped by life. So for me that rules out someone in their early 20s, maybe even mid 20s. Because although they are an adult, they're not beaten and battered by life. They've still got that invincibility. They've still got that I can take on the world attitude. James Bond doesn't really have that. He's a very cynical, calculated fucking killer. And that requires someone of a certain age for me. And it's why I was against Tom Holland's name coming up. Tom's a brilliant actor. He's English. He wears a suit well. By the time they make this movie, he'll be knocking on 30. But for me, he just doesn't have that mature vibe to him. He looks very young. He looks like a guy in his teens. I don't think you can take him serious as James Bond. He doesn't seem to me to be a guy who's going to woo women. They're going to be falling at his feet. A guy that's going to be taken serious by these sort of mafia crime bosses. A guy that's going to be walking about fucking shooting people left, right and centre. He doesn't strike me as that kind of guy. He should still be Spider-Man for the next 10 years. Then he can start thinking about James Bond. On the flip side, people always want Idris Elba. I've actually got a quote from Idris here saying pretty much he's not going to be playing James Bond. He's confirming it. He's sick of getting asked about it. It's lazy journalism. He's done with it, man. It's not going to happen with Idris. Idris is in his 50s. It's too late. I think he's in his 50s. It's over for him in terms of playing James Bond. It's done. Dead in the water. So there's this sweet spot. And for me, it's probably 30 to maybe 40, where you're still youngish, you've still got the energy, You've still got that drive. You've got the longevity to play the character for maybe 10, 15 years. 40's getting maybe a little bit too old, because you are getting into your mid to late 50s at the end of your stint. But for me, that's the range. And if you look through this article, you start to see that it is the fucking range for previous Bonds. Arguably, for me, the greatest James Bond is Sean Connery. He was cast at 32 in his first James Bond movie. He played the character, he went away, he came back again. That's the longevity you need to play James Bond. But you have the lived in fucking look. I mean, this guy's 32 here. This guy's a fucking year younger than me. There. He looks about fucking 20 years older than me, man. But that's probably more to do with the 60s. And what they were eating. What was in the water. The soaps they were using. The lack of sun lotion back then. That's what done that to him. But you see what I mean here, man. You go through this article. Connery wasn't the youngest to play Bond. George Lazenby was 30 years old when he started. And his one and only 007 outing. That's not something we're going to see now. We're not going to get one and done James Bonds. This is going to be a franchise. You're going to get 4 movies with this character. You space it 3-4 years between. That's the better part of 20 fucking years. You're not going to get a one and done. Afterwards, you've got 41-year-old Connery coming back briefly. And then, as you can see down here, the oldest motherfucking James Bond was Roger Moore. 45 years old he was. So what am I getting at here, man? He should be much younger. He should be younger than Daniel Craig, who was in his 40s when he was cast as James Bond. He should be younger than Roger Moore, who was 45. They should be round about the Connery age. 30, 31, 32. Now, I don't know if that rules out some of the primary figures who'll be getting involved. I'm desperate to try to find some of them. Just now, you've got Jean Reggie Page. I know for a fact is one that's getting his name touted. He's 34. He's perfect, man. If they make this movie in the next couple of years, he's 36, mid-30s. He's got that ruggedness. He's got that experience, slight maturity, but still young enough to fucking do it for 10 years, 12 years. There's not many more in there, man. Richard Madden's in his mid-30s. The other Scottish guy, whose name's eluded me, I think he's in his late 30s. These guys are in that sweet spot just now, but the longer they take to make this movie, you're going to start losing some of these actors as potential Bonds if you've got a certain age range in mind. And that may bring the likes of Tom Holland on board. But for me, I don't know. It's going to be so interesting, man. Look, I'm not a huge James Bond fan. I'm not a fucking obsessive fanatic like some people. But he is a legendary cinematic character, and the rebuff, the way they've modernised the character, they've modernised the franchise in light of the likes of your Jason Bournes, obviously your Mission Impossible with J.J. Abrams, Christopher McQuarrie, what they're doing with that, rejuvenating action franchises, giving us something different, pushing the boundaries of what you can do. They've had to reform James Bond as a franchise. They've done it with Daniel Craig. I hope they continue that on with a young, different James Bond. Looking forward to it, man. Looking forward to seeing who they cast and where they go with it, because it's a legendary franchise. But yeah, before I speak about this, incidentally, keep fucking coming away for these topics. I have to get into the habit. If you've got anything to say about James Bond, who would you want to be James Bond? Do you agree? Should James Bond be much younger? Is there a specific age range that they should be looking at for the next James Bond? What's too old? What's too young? Who do you want to be the next James Bond? Share your thoughts down below in the comment section about that, and we'll endeavour to get back to you at some point, I'm sure. Probably fucking quick, because I'm up at all hours, so I will scour the comments and reply if you drop a comment.